Firstly, thank you for coming. We weren't expecting such a great turnout. It's such a jam-packed program. We know there's a lot of other things to go see. But I'm also really heartened to see so many of you in the room on a topic of change and transformation, because I'm assuming, because you're here, that actually this is something that you see potentially within your own roles. And I do want to ask you a little bit about why you're here and what you're hoping to get from the session. This is going to be quite an open, free-flowing discussion. So it's a little bit wild and woolly, but we do have some themes that we think we're very likely to explore throughout this. One of the reasons I put this together was, I guess, partly because in a previous guise, I have seen it from the inside out in terms of the need to move organizations on and to appreciate how unforgiving digital is when it comes to dysfunction within organizations, and the notion of unhealthy organizations, actually, ones that are not functioning in a really helpful manner. And digital is incredibly unforgiving of that, because unlike other areas of activity within museums, which perhaps can work in more vertical ways, so maybe you kind of travel across the institution, but in a very kind of hierarchical or vertical fashion, digital just doesn't really work like that. It's very much about crossing over boundaries, crashing into people's fiefdoms, interfering with roles and responsibilities. And often it's the person trying to lead on those projects who by default becomes the change agent, because it simply doesn't work the way it is currently set up. So I'm hoping in this discussion we kind of try and tease out some of these issues and try and think about some of the characteristics perhaps of a change agent. And by the end of it, I hope that, certainly from my perspective, that maybe we've collectively developed a better understanding of what that role is, what that function is, what aspects of leadership are involved in that process, and also how it benefits the organization, because it won't be an easy ride. But I believe it's a worthwhile one, and one that's actually essential for the sector. So is that a fair summary?
Sure, yeah. And I think we'll do intros in just a second, but if we could get maybe a show of hands of how many of you view yourselves as a change agent? Okay, great.
That's good to see.
That's good to see. How many of you view that happening successfully? Lot fewer. Okay.
Excellent. Partial success.
Partial success.
A work in progress.
Yeah.
A work in progress, yes. Okay. Yeah, so I think that we're going to have a dialogue up here, but this is also going to be very much about a conversation with you, because we'd also like to hear your experiences.
You're on the naughty table over there.
And now, without further ado, we'll do introductions.
Good timing. Best excuse ever.
At least that's an honest answer.
That is an honest one.
Okay, I guess I will kick off the introductions. I'm the one up here without a name tag, so I'm the late addition, but my name's Allegra Burnette, for those of you I don't know. Until this spring, I was the creative director of digital media at the Museum of Modern Art, where I oversaw a team of designers, developers, and producers who were working on apps, the website, mobile, digital display screens. So I have recently left the museum, and I am currently a principal analyst at Forrester Research. I'm in the customer experience group, and I'm focused on design research. And so Forrester is really about helping their clients make better decisions about how they do business. And so what's been really interesting for me for the last few months is to see some of these ideas that are playing out in the museum and cultural sector and applying those across different industries. So that's sort of the perspective I'm now bringing to the table. So I'll turn that over.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Douglas Hegley. I'm the Director of Media and Technology at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. I've been there for 3 years. Before that, I spent 14 years at the Metropolitan Museum, where my job was hauling battleships over mountains using dental floss.
Very visual.
Yeah, that was more or less. I have considered myself an agent of change for a very long time. My background is actually in psychology and in organizational psychology. So really what I do is I try to affect change. I was hired in Minneapolis to come in and create change. So we can talk a little bit about that as the session progresses.
Excellent. I'm Charlotte Sexton, and as of the next few days, I'm still the president of MCN. But actually in my former career, I was the head of digital media at the National Gallery in London. And I was there for about 12 years, 13 years. And that's an important fact because it was the period of establishing the first digital media department and going in at a more junior role and then sort of rising up through the ranks to lead the department in the end. And I left there late last year, and in fact we have a panel on Friday about people who've left the sector. And a very interesting time in terms of having very big ambitions for digital in terms of driving the organization, but it being a very traditional organization, very hierarchical, even in a senior role, quite a lot of challenges to make that happen, and almost a kind of UN job of forging alliances across the organization at all levels and across all departments. But I'm now operating, setting up a new consultancy agency, which is, really about exploring 20 years of experience in the sector, and that struggle between, for cultural organizations in terms of establishing the vision, but also the kind of backing that up with the kind of support that staff need to make that change happen. So I hope I had an interesting perspective of the inside-outside.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Honeysett. I'm the Executive Director of the Balboa Park Online Collaborative, BPOC, which is, Balboa Park is, if you know, a city park in San Diego of 27 cultural institutions. And so part of my struggle, I've been in the position 6 months, so part of my struggle is figuring out how to be an agent of change for 27 cultural institutions, hence gray hair. Prior to that, I was head of administration at the Getty Museum, and I have a little interesting story about, well, mildly interesting, I assume, about why I chose to take on a role of head of administration, because I am a self-proclaimed recovering technologist. And part of my struggle was trying to affect change and trying to get technology onto the agenda at the Getty. And whatever your perception of the Getty is, it is a hard place to move. It's an institution that takes time to move, and I struggled with trying to get that organization to move comprehensively into digital, kind of however you define that. And so one of my core reasons for taking on this head of administration role was to actually get on the other side of the table. And I saw an opportunity to then affect change from a kind of an administrative point of view and champion it from that side. So I have, again, that perspective that I hope to bring to this conversation.
Thanks, Nick. I'm Carolyn Royston. I'd like to apologize for being late to my own panel, and that you were all on time, so well done. Until very recently, was head of digital at the Imperial War Museum in London, where I was head there for just over 5 years. I guess I got a reputation in the UK for being a change agent, for being late and a change agent. And I think there's good and bad connotations to that. And prior to that, I was project director for a massive online learning project, where I was based at the V&A. It was a crazy project, and I think that was when I first learned how to be an agent of change stroke rebel. So I guess I bring that perspective to it, and now I'm about to embark on a new career as a consultant, and hope to instill all of those great virtues of being a change agent in other people.
So, I mean, I think the topic that we're talking about today has really already been picked up on quite a bit so far in the conference. So, for example, in the Ignite last night, we heard about tugboats, and we heard about Max talking about, the point of view of the museum director. And one of the things that we were talking about as a panel is really thinking about this notion of an agent of change across different levels and different, whether it's the top level managers or I learned a new term, maybe.
People at the coalface.
People at the coalface, which is apparently a very British term.
From the Industrial Revolution.
So if you feel like you're facing the coal face right now, we're here to help. So maybe Charlotte, you could start with one of the things you've talked about is a digital superhero. What do you mean by that term?
Yeah, the digital superhero is feels like a kind of relatively new change in the industry, where certainly in the UK, I can't speak for the US, but there's been huge upheaval in the museum sector in the UK, and especially at the national level, the big organisations. And in part, that's really been brought about by them kind of responding very slowly, very late, to the economic downturn. And these organisations are pretty much like big oil tankers, and it's very hard to do a handbrake turn when your vehicle's 1.5 miles long and you're in the middle of the ocean. But what that has caused to happen is that they have really had to foreground revenue generation. And so it's been a huge driver for them in terms of looking at the resource that they currently have within the organisation and somehow coming to the conclusion that that is not the right resource for what they need in these cash-strapped times. So what has tended to happen is that in a series of reorgs, that a lot of the traditional management structure has been stripped away, and that authority and their wages have been rolled into these new superhero roles. So these are the people that are basically going to come in from outside of the industry. That's a very important point. They are not recruiting museum people for these roles. They're coming in from broadcast and commercial backgrounds. They're coming in at a higher level in the organization. They're coming in with more money, and they're coming in with a ton more responsibility, because they're usually overseeing a whole raft of departments, but under this umbrella of digital, because in the current view of the world, digital is going to save the world for cultural organizations in the UK. So that's the digital superhero role.
Yeah, and I don't think it's ever limited to digital. I think one of the risks right now in the US is the big data superheroes are coming, right? A lot of companies are very focused on big data, and they think their only solution is to go hire a PhD from Princeton, and they're going to solve all their big data problems. Good luck with that one. So this organizational quagmire where we're stuck, we know we're behind, the only way to catch up is to hire someone who has a lofty title and very little practical experience for the past 10 years, and expect that person to turn everything around. I mean, it's an organizational myth, and you'll see it in almost any organization. The temptation to take that role is really great, right? You're really seen as someone who's going to come in and save everyone. Good luck if that's your approach. I think that I personally don't know any superheroes. Anyone here a superhero, or actually? Nick's a superhero.
Part-time.
I actually don't know any superheroes. You know what I know? I know people who hire fantastic staff, motivate and empower them, and then see them get things done. Right? It's not a superpower.
I think I've been fortunate enough to help a number of institutions kind of think through a digital strategy, and the problem comes when two things. One is they think bringing in a CIO is going to solve all their problems, and without any support. So one individual, CIO level, is going to solve their entire digital problem, which is completely nonsensical. And so I see that challenge. And the other is they're going from kind of 0 to 60 in terms of their literacy in doing this stuff. And there's no or minimal preparation on the part of the organization to receive an individual who is going to come up with a digital strategy. And I've seen a number of organizations, and I'm going to name them, who've brought in the individual. And there have been a lot, over the last 6 to 9 months, there have been a lot of positions created. A bunch of folks at the conference, names that you'll know, have gone into institutions in this role. And I worry about whether they've been set up to fail. People like Susan and Nancy, who are amazingly accomplished individuals, and I really hope that the organizations that they're going into to kind of solve, crack this digital nut, are actually ready for that change, because it can be really difficult. Sorry?
Could you elaborate on what you think, or could all of you elaborate on what you think it takes for an organization to be ready in the sense that you're describing? What needs to be done to truly be ready to then mobilize and advance?
The conversations that I'm having, and we've had this conversation before, about it's not really about going digital. It's about an organizational transition which is more entrepreneurial, more nimble, kind of. And one of the most important things is, if you're going to embark on a digital strategy, you got to create the capacity to do it. And you've got, and just Douglas, you're talking about the superhero. And Mike Edson talks about this a lot, and I actually use this framework too, the maturity capability model, which that level 0 of organizations operating in chaos is exactly that. Those individuals who give an immense amount of their talent and skill to get stuff done in an environment where they're constantly meeting barriers. And what happens is they end up and leave. And I'm going to make an assumption that a lot of you who put your hands up, who didn't put your hands up when we said how successful are you, are having a really hard time struggling with how to advance your strategy to the point where you're probably considering moving on, jumping out of one frying pan into another frying pan.
Well, and I think it's also a little bit of the challenge that we have with launching new projects and products is that it's only fairly recently that I think people have gotten evolved to think past that launch date, to think through the ongoing life of the project, the maintenance, even thinking through the future death of it. So in the case of this role, it's like there's so much focus on what that job description is, what that title is, who that person is coming in, that then there isn't that kind of follow through of, okay, what happens when we actually get this person in? Because in a sense, they're supposed to figure it all out. And in many cases, especially as Charlotte was saying with British museums, they don't have the background knowledge of what a museum, what are the particular challenges within working in this environment. Can be a good thing in that they're bringing fresh perspective, but at the same time, they have a kind of long runway to get up and running. And so, you're sort of being handed a little bit of the short shrift there. So it's an interesting, model to think, okay, we have to think past the launch of these roles and also think past this sort of evolution of it. You see a lot of these positions with the word digital in it. Well, are those roles, temporary roles, or are those, placeholder until digital becomes more, enmeshed in everything that we do across the museum?
I mean, I would say as well that this is a very, very hard. If you're working in this area in a museum, this is a hard role. And quite often it's a lonely role, and it's a leadership role, and it's difficult to be a leader when you don't feel like you're in a position of leadership. And so somehow, finding those qualities and developing those qualities are really important. And I think one of the things, just to carry on from what Allegra said, is that is that we're so often focused on the shiny product. You know, our senior management team, our bosses, you know, they like to talk about stuff. They like to, you know, they're not really interested in, you know, something that's in its third iteration and it's buggy and, you know, we're proud of it, but they're not. So I think that it's understanding how to talk about things in ways that that make sense for your senior managers, but also it's about understanding that most of the structures and processes that you're working with in your organization are not really fit for purpose anymore. So you're not just trying to develop, you know, or change things. You're changing really big organizational issues, you know, that are nothing to do with digital. Digital is just exposing what isn't really working anymore. So it's a really, really difficult role and a difficult path to plow. And so I think, you know, I often found that it was not trying to tackle everything at once, but tackling the small battles, the things that you can win, your own sphere of influence, you know, the things that actually you can change. Often bringing those small successes then leads to bigger success. Yeah.
So I agree with what you just said.
Okay.
If our goals were not so lofty, that we can't accept small incremental changes, but rather hopefully to build consensus on what is success, when will we achieve success or partial, or are we moving forward? Are we moving forward? We're not going back. Then maybe that's enough.
Yeah. And I'm
There's one more question. You a couple of times had your hand up.
So I've been in the museum digital world for 17 years. I started as head of a new media department, and about 6 years in, I was able to take a lateral move out of being the head and into being a designer, which is my true love. And what I found now, you know, I'm not blaming anybody, but what I found is that as the head, I became a lightning rod, and part of being agents of change, that's what can happen to you. And so what I found, I didn't know this would happen, but what I found is that in my role now, I can, you know, be an agent of change on a different type of level. And it doesn't mean that I'm not a lightning rod, so I can't avoid that. But it makes it easier. And I also learned at some point to be thankful for small victories, because I think that part of our jobs are to look ahead and see what's coming and going, oh yeah, I can see how that could work, you know, and bringing everybody with you is a very arduous task.
I'm going to riff on that a little bit. People are talking about small victories. Who wins? You know, I think where you're going to get your risks in many ways is if you think it's you who's winning, or you think it's digital that's winning. The organization has to win, right? You're there. Your role is to help the organization be successful. Where are the discussions taking place? When I am coming into an organization to talk about strategy, and I get, you know, iPads and tablets and networks and a Wi-Fi, and I'm like, this isn't strategy. This is nowhere near strategy, right? What are we talking about? What are we trying to do? Is there a mention of an audience? Is there any mention of experience? Is there any sense of engagement?
It's not bringing in technology that I consider a small victory.
Right.
It's changing a mindset, and actually part of my stealth is to have written about, you know, these things, how social media has changed our relationships with our coworkers, and what new roles do we play. You know, all of those, I'm trying to understand how I can be more effective, and also be not just effective so that I feel good when I go home,
Right.
but that there's strategies for bringing people along,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things. One, always remove ego from the equation, right? I can't count how many times I've been in a meeting with some trustees or senior management, and one of them says, wait, I have a brilliant idea. And I sit there and say, that's my frickin' idea from like 6 years ago, right? But who cares? Finally, it's going to happen, right? So my response at that point would be like, that is a brilliant idea. How can I help? Right? 'Cause I don't need to own the idea. It doesn't matter. I planted a seed. The seed came to fruition. And I think this idea of making yourself available, making yourself open. And people here know Beck Tench. I think Beck is another person who recently left the museum field, unfortunately. But Beck has this great story she'll tell about her arrival in North Carolina and how people were sort of afraid of technology and didn't understand technology. And that's part of the issue, right? So Beck basically said, look, every Friday I'm going to go to this bar after work. Just come on over. And I think the first couple of weeks, nobody showed up. I mean, she just kept saying, I'll be at this bar. Oh, and I'm going to bring an iPhone with me if you want to check it out and see what it's like. And pretty soon people were coming. And she said, no, take it home for the weekend. Just familiarizing people, making them comfortable with things, making sure that we're connecting as human to human, not as technologist to anti-technologist. And until I win, I'm going to keep hammering at you. Like, it's always a dead end.
Carolyn, maybe you could talk at this point about the computer club, because that's sort of where all this.
My favorite topic. You mean in terms of it being providing
Well,
kind
I
of some
mean,
kind of leadership? Or,
I think
it's a vehicle for kind of building
What prompted
trust
you to
and
start it, and what
exposure.
have you, some of the things that you've learned out of that, just for, especially for people who
Okay.
aren't familiar with it?
So really briefly, I mean, Computer Club was something that initiative I started at the Imperial War Museum, which was really about trying to encourage staff engagement with digital. As I could increasingly see that it wasn't sustainable for my department to be the only people that were responsible for digital activity in the organization. And it was about really how to get people involved and to develop confidence in digital and to become interested in it. And so we started an informal club, we called it, and it was a drop-in, a monthly drop-in. We had stickers, which seemed to be the most popular thing ever in the museum sector. Who knew? And what happened was that people came and they really loved it, and it was something that my team could lead on and run in the organization, and it got people who perhaps didn't have any, or normally were kind of sitting behind a computer and weren't necessarily engaged with other people in the organization, other departments. They got to have a leadership role because they would run some of the sessions, and we would change the topics, and so people would take on different kinds of opportunities. And so it was a real opportunity for the rest of the organization to see people in my team in a different way, and it was an opportunity for the organization to have a hands-on experience in an informal way that wasn't about their job, to just engage with technology. And it was an hour, and it was fun, and that was all it was. And I think it was just an initiative. It was what it was. And I think there's some creativity around thinking about what are some of the things that you could be doing within your organization, going back to that thing around taking on a leadership role in a position where, you don't feel that you have that kind of authority. What can you do around you, and who can you influence? Who's in that sphere of influence that can help you out? Who are your buddies? And what are some of the things that you can do, perhaps even on a very small scale? Because what you don't know is that, a ripple over here may end up extending over here. And until you try, you don't know, and it may not work, and you may have to. I tried loads of things, and the thing was, I just kept coming back. Annoyingly, I kept coming back with another idea. I'd bounce into the office, I'd be like, hey, to my team, late. Have you thought about, It's fine.
We're never
It's
gonna
fine.
get that one out.
As I said, I don't care. But basically, I would bounce into the office and I'd be like, I was on the bus, sitting in traffic. I've had this really great idea, and it would, they'd sort of sit there and go, really, really, and I'd be like, yeah, okay, fine, and come back the next day with another one and another one until eventually they gave in.
Yeah.
And actually, what happened was, sorry, I'm just now
Go ahead.
talking. But what happened from the perspective of the department was that it raised our profile. And actually, because it was popular, I went to see the director general, and she was like, okay, fine, give this a go. And the thing was that people got out of my way because we were starting to have success, and other people were talking about it. So, and I didn't know any of that was going to happen.
Actually, just to carry on, it just made me think of something about, I think when you are working in a very sort of department-based organization, it's often, and everybody is very much corralled within their individual roles and job titles. It's very interesting what activity is, it looks quite benign, but actually is quite subversive in a way because it's quite powerful, is anything that happens where people can jump out of those boundaries and those departmental things. And for me, when I was at the National Gallery, that would happen around training events, funnily enough, because what would happen is you'd have a particular topic for training, and it would attract people from different places across the organization. And these would be people that you never talk to. And then suddenly you would build a relationship with those people within that safe environment and forge relationships, forge friendships or whatever. But what that actually meant, and this was really just a positive byproduct of that process, was as I was working through issues around embedding digital and getting initiatives off the ground and making alliances, they shortcut a number of really interesting conversations, which I might have struggled to have had previously. And in a really peculiar way, what was starting to happen was building a degree of trust. We don't really talk about trust in a work environment, but actually it's a catalyst, can be a really important catalyst for change. Especially if you start to get out, you talked about ego, but if you start to get beyond your own personal agenda and really start to think about how could we work. We use the word collaboration a lot, but actually most people don't really collaborate. They just sort of, kind of vaguely.
Wait until it's their chance to talk.
Exactly. They just wait. They wait and dive in. So the idea of, imagine it's not a working group where you have a number of individuals with their own agenda and their own sort of individual activity. Imagine that was transformed into team number one. That team number one is about driving the organization forward and working in a completely different way. And that level of trust means that you can have very frank conversations. You can call me out, I can call you out, and we can have constructive disagreement, but ultimately we're team number one. And it's not about that departmental mindset. And I think that's very powerful in changing the organization.
Yeah. I mean, I think that ties into something that we did at MoMA, but also something that I've been doing since I came to Forrester. So I mentioned in the beginning that I'm in the customer experience group, which is sort of like, the broader version of visitor services or visitor experience. And one of the exercises that we do with a lot of clients is customer journey mapping. And what you're doing is you're looking at an entire journey from the point of view of a customer and all the pain points and sort of the emotions that happen along the way. And then you sort of dive deeper into looking at, the ecosystem that's supporting that. And suddenly, I've done this a couple of times with clients, and inevitably it's just a very simple step-by-step process. But at some point along the way, they all have this like aha moment because they've all gotten out of, these departments and silos and put themselves in that particular role. Well, museums have been thinking about visitors for a very long time, but yet we still tend to, fall back into those department silos. And so if you can just flip that conversation into that, okay, how do we solve this particular challenge or problem from the point of view of our visitors, and then look at how those people can be brought together in different ways along the way. I think that's an interesting perspective. Yeah.
What I think you're all talking about is, not having the superhero, not having the digital superhero, but actually trying to get the whole organization moving. And what's very interesting for me is, before lunch, I was in this room, and there were Bill Weinstein, Janet Strong-Morgan, Mike Button, at that table, all coming at it from an IT department perspective, and talking about being, Bill Weinstein said, people think that they're the rock in the stream and they have to try and get past them. And my eyes have a really slow refresh rate. I can pretty much see you all in one room now. But these guys are over there talking about how they want to stop being a barrier to change, and how they're trying to break things down and become more part of the same team as everyone else. Mike Buttman said chocolate is apparently the big thing. But it sounds like we shouldn't be talking about agents of change as if it's someone who's going to come and move it. It's all about getting the entire organization to think, which after all, because by now everyone should be thinking digitally, and obviously Computer Club and the other initiatives like it that we heard about a bit at Ignite, about actually getting the whole organization that way. But I just think you should speak to those guys. They were interested too.
Never speak to them.
Yeah, I'm also trying to do a little bit of synthesis because I've heard some really interesting points. But Charlotte, when you were speaking, it occurred to me that you had made connections to all the other panelists. In that, in your example of this training, this momentary training, sort of gearing up skills and so on, it unified whatever group that happened to be around a very clear outcome. And when I reflect on the other organizations I've worked with, and this idea of museums so often operating in chaos, when I look at the outcomes that they articulate, both in their strategic plans and their tactical plans, the outcomes remain incredibly vague, and they're impossible to sort of organize an entire group of people around. And they tend to sort of describe everything the museum would ever want to do. And it seems to me that the way museums can get out of this mess of operating in a sort of a chaotic way and trying to do all things for all people is to kind of really narrow focus for some period of time and have some really concrete outcomes, like your training session, where everybody sort of leaves their silo and says, okay, for this period of time, we're really gonna focus on upping our skills and upping our outcomes to do this. I'd like to have you reflect on that.
I think that's right. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I think, what we've been hearing here is museums are traditionally, they're siloed. And how do you figure out how to start working laterally? Because that's really, it's about communication and it's about establishing relationships at a lower level. In Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell talks about, if you want to effect, large change, it comes from very small individual changes that, so those of you struggling with minor successes, I would encourage you to keep going and try and figure out how to encourage others to be successful through, brown bags and those kinds of things. I'll share one story with you from the Getty. The new trust president comes in and has no idea what technology is going, what digital is going on across the trust, thinks that nothing is happening, and was not interested in doing any kind of broader digital strategy. So created this, what was called the digital cabinet, which was meant to be this kind of senior leadership getting together once a month, to figure out a digital strategy. The problem was that the trust president only wanted to know about the technologies that were going on. So for about 2 years, this digital cabinet was just show and tell of all the different projects that are going on across the trust. And what happened was after about 6 months, everyone realized that it was completely useless. And so a shadow digital cabinet was formed at a lower level where those communications and those discussions did start going on, and people started to see where the connections were and start doing cross-departmental projects and initiatives.
There,
There were hostage exchanges. Not many people got hurt.
To pick up on the Malcolm Gladwell point too, there's a book, Blue Ocean Strategy, that's in the process of being rewritten, that I think it's coming out in January or February, which talks about a similar point of view, and it's sort of thinking about that kind of big vision, but how do you get there? How do you make the change happen within that? So just as a reference, that might be also worth looking at as well, especially when the new version comes out early next year. It's Blue Ocean Strategy. I might have that slightly wrong, but yeah, I think it's just Blue Ocean Strategy. But, this notion of focus, I think, is really important, and it's certainly one that you're seeing, not just in the museum sector, but in other industries, because if you think about other companies, they're trying to, deal with all the startups coming and compete in that arena. And so a lot of people are now saying, okay, rather than trying to do all things, be all things to all people, let's come up with a clear statement and let's use that as a way to prioritize our efforts. So you're setting this North Star, and then how, the strategy within that, or how the steps you go through to get to that North Star can evolve over time. And then, when you sort of reach that, you can then set the next one. And so one example of that might be, T-Mobile actually, and I'm just going to, my role is to give you some examples outside of museums. So T-Mobile, came up with this idea of be the uncarrier, right? Don't try and just do what everybody else is doing and do it slightly better. Be different, think differently. And so they did away with contracts and really simplified their the cost offering. And everything for the next couple of years, and currently, all of the efforts that they've done have been focused around that priority. And as a result, they've the first year, I think they had a $1 billion increase in revenue. But it's also something that everybody at T-Mobile could absorb and and internalize and think about. And that was sort of, okay, well, is this effort about being an uncarrier? Well, no, well, let's deprioritize it. And so having that kind of one simple focus statement, whether it's at the museum-wide level or at your individual sphere of influence level, I think is a really important way to start thinking, because what it means is you have a framework for prioritizing your efforts and your engagements, and it's a very quick way to connect with people in a description of what you're going for.
It reminds me of seeing digital strategy documents printed out, many pages long, collecting dust on a shelf, because there's no practical, doable focus. It's something that happened outside of the organization and wasn't really inculcated in what were they going to do. The other thought I was having too is sitting up here with these panelists. I've been doing this for almost 20 years as well, and I've been stuck many, many times, frustrated, angry, ready to quit. What do? I go to these guys, right? I come to this conference, I join MCN. Charlotte's soon to be an ex-president. I'm already an ex-president. And I miss Air Force One, but the rest of it, the security guards are kind of. But the idea that having a peer group, so in the organization, fantastic. Have that peer group, have those allies, people you can work with. We're each other's peer group here as well, regardless of what state you are in an organization. And I can also confess to several times having invited several people in this room, maybe individually, maybe in groups, to come to my organization as experts, knowing full well that we're on equal basis. Because 6 months later, I go to their organization as the expert and just say what they've been saying for 4 years, and then everyone says, God, Douglas is brilliant. We have to do what Douglas says. And I'm like, sorry, Nick. But Nick's like, yes, we finally get to do. But, and all Nick does is tell me what to say, right? So there are ways that you can use us. I'm sort of volunteering all of us, but anybody in MCN, I think, is happy to do this kind of thing. I know there were times when my senior staff were visiting another museum, and I would quickly call up someone I knew from MCN at that museum and say, look, my associate director is going to be there. Can you get in the lunch meeting and just drop these 2 ideas? And it really helps. It really functions. So one of the things that I'm going to shut up in a second. I wanted to just kind of check in with you guys. The session is meant to be somewhat practical, meant to sort of give you some advice on how to make changes. Are we being practical enough? Are we missing anything? We have a microphone. We want this to be dialogue. We're not trying to lecture. So. Home phone number. You can find me without my home phone number easily.
I think it would be also interesting to hear from you all perhaps some things that have worked, that you have found that work too. So it's not just us and our examples, but it would be great to hear small victories in your sphere of influence that you've had, or big ones.
Yeah, we'll take a big one.
While you're thinking of that, I'll share with you, I did an engagement with a museum a while ago, and this whole notion, basically they wanted to create a digital strategy, and I said, what you're really talking about is transitioning the organization to be more nimble and entrepreneurial and all those kinds of things. And they said, well, the director said, well, what's the most significant thing we can do to start transitioning the audience, the institution? And what I said was, and are there any HR people in the room? Good. Because what it's really about is bringing, the reason museums aren't innovative and entrepreneurial and risk takers is because that HR process filters them out. I mean, those HR questions are meant to filter out people who may be a risk to the organization. It drives me nuts. And so, so you can't expect an organization to be entrepreneurial and risk takers because they didn't make it through the door. So what I said to him was, you don't need a CIO or a director of digital strategy. You need a director of digital HR. You need someone who's checking off these check boxes as you're bringing people in for, risk, innovation, all those kinds of things. I think was it last year? Who gave the keynote last year? Who talked about
Tina.
Swiss Miss.
Yes, and so she talked about these, what's your super secret talent, these other things outside the normal, what would you do if you, had an argument with your boss and, you had access to firearms, those kinds of things. But I know.
I'm going to agree with you because I was going to make a very similar point that I think one of the very practical things that you can do is engage with your HR department because, and again, I'm hoping there's no HR people in here, but my experience is that there's quite low digital literacy and understanding in our HR departments, and I think that's a problem. And I think it's a problem because we're not recruiting in necessarily the right sorts of people with the right sorts of skills, but also they're not setting the right curriculum for training and development. So going back to that digital literacy, back to that staff engagement, that's not happening. We're still operating with very traditional training programs that aren't really fit for purpose anymore. And that change is not going to happen from those departments. That change needs to happen from us. We need to be going there and being proactive and talking about the kinds of skills that we need our staff to have and helping them to set new training programs and, looking at that in the context of annual appraisals, forward job plans, performance reviews. What should we be expecting our staff from directors down, the kinds of skills and understanding that they need to have now? Because they need to be leading from the top, and if they're not leading from the top and they're not living that digital dream, then why should anybody else in the organization? So I think it's this goes back to this whole kind of organizational change issue, and having those conversations with your HR department and helping them to think about what they need to do next, I think is, again, can be a really powerful leadership role.
I want to be a little bit subversive. I won't let HR get anywhere near my hiring process. I'm absolutely serious, right? They'll process the paperwork. And I don't mean that in any mean way. I go in just saying, look, I'm gonna really help you out here. Just send me every single resume. Right? They're responsible for posting places. Send us every single resume. We develop a path by which my entire team does rapid resume review. We take care of it. I cannot trust. It's so vitally important to hire great people. If you can take a team of 10 great employees, bring in one bad employee, and the whole team sucks. And then sooner or later, best people leave. It is so vitally important to hire the right people. There's no way I would let HR ever be involved in screening or interviewing anybody who I'm going to hire.
Well, but wouldn't you be involved in that process anyway? I mean, for me, it's about collaborating and working with them. I'm going to be subversive.
Yeah, really. How many more subs? Actually, though, in all seriousness, and I know both of you have strong views on this, but I think there is a trait in leadership, because everyone's busy and you've got loads to do and all the rest of it, that when you see a problem, bad HR department, the natural way of approaching that is to go around it. And actually, I think the bigger benefit would be to tackle it and fix it. Because what happens for the next recruitment and the recruitment after that and the one after that? And when digital is part of everybody's job description and those recruits are happening across the organization and you've still got a screwed up HR department, where's the progress?
That's a really good point.
Completely agree.
So,
Sorry, I actually, I'm the director of IT for the Seattle Art Museum. I've been there 3 months, so I'm really new. But the challenge, so I guess I don't have a good example to say that we're success because we're really at the ground level of we're so far behind. We're so far, and so we're at the ground level of trying to figure all this out. So we literally just finished a 3-year plan, but I'm worried at how that was done. So basically, each department was said to come up with some goals and then execute. But it's weird because digital is just kind of thrown in there. It's not really a huge part of the strategy. So then I'm like, well, should it be a huge part of that strategy? And then do we have a conversation to rethink this all over again? And so we're like, well, maybe we just have like a little digital task force, right? That will like talk about these issues. But now the point is it's about to fall apart because they can't stop bickering and they can't stop getting out of their silos and they can't stop changing the way they've done things. And so kind of the response that we've gotten was, well, we'll show you, you'll figure it out. And that's kind of how we're left. So thing is, they keep looking at me, because I guess I'm new, right? They keep looking at me, and they're like, well, you can fix it, right? And I'm like, well, I don't even know where to start. So I guess that's the question is like, where do you start? Like, should I just start with a project? Or do I need to go back to that 3-year plan and say, well, do we need to redo this again? Like, I don't even know where to start this conversation, because we're too busy yelling at each other and like being territorial. It's like, how do you even... Do you know what I mean? Am I alone in this? Or it's like, I know, right? Yeah, this is my first time in the museum world too, and I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh my God, what did I get into? So I like, yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, like Coven said, welcome to the museum world. I mean, my advice to you initially would be, and you may already have that, have you established trust and credentials in your organization? With your peers and folks who can help you do that. Because I think that's really important. Because if you're going to start making not so much waves, but wanting to start to move the organization forward in small ways, you got to have the trust of people that are going to do that for you. And I would say, figure out, it may not be a good idea to say, right, we're going to do a digital strategic plan, because it sounds like everyone thinks that you've already done it. So I'd be inclined to, do a ground war and kind of figure out who are the individuals across the organization where you can do small projects, I think, small successes, make some improvements in various places, which may be, maybe a build-up to creating capacity to actually do a much bigger, digital strategy engagement. And so, look for improvements in processes and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, and at the risk of starting to sound like a broken record, I would look at that plan and say, okay, is there something I can pull out that can be a focus that we can start with, that I can, do a cross-silo effort in order to help build the trust, but also take advantage of the fact that you are new. I mean, I think when you are new, there's a balance between, oh, they're coming in and just taking over my turf versus, oh, they've got a fresh perspective. And if so, you can build the trust of, I'm coming in with a fresh perspective, let's take this piece to focus on and then rally the troops around that. Then I think that's kind of a good way to say, okay, here's a first effort, here's what came out of that, let's move this forward, as opposed to tackling the entire plan all over again.
It's very hard to totally dismantle something. Much easier to clarify the thinking around it, and then having that kind of clear statement of intent. Because often what you see is just a load of confetti projects sprinkled because everybody did it independently and nobody's actually taken the trouble to think about this digital program, which is actually what you're working on. And then pick out your hero project. And that's the one you can use to transform the organization through that. Great.
I'd actually, sorry, just to follow up on that, I'd also point you to Don Undine's session from last year's MCN, where he talks about kind of the importance of bringing lightheartedness and humor into, basically establishing that, like, hey, it's fun to be in a meeting with me, and, then you're going to want to be in a meeting with me even when it's something that's not that fun to talk about. But also on top of that, I'd say, a very practical strategy is get to know your staff in non-crisis situations. And when you're in IT, I think that's really hard, because it's like, as you're finding, it's like on week 2, it's like, here's the things that have piled up over the last 6 months while you weren't here, and everything's a crisis. But if you have established a relationship with someone where you're just like, let's go to lunch for no reason, we're not even going to talk about anything important, I think that's a really practical way to just sort of establish that, so that when there is a crisis, it's like, okay, we already have a thing sort of established here.
Wise words from Coven. Sorry, the legendary Coven Smith.
So I just wanted to go back to the HR component, because
Yay.
I think it's absolutely critical. And well, I understand Douglas's strategy, and there is
Or
something
lack
to
thereof.
that. I think that we live in a world now where like MCN used to be really kind of back-end focused, and now we've kind of swung to the front-end focus, and now I think we're all coming back to the middle, and the reason we're coming back to the middle is all of our systems need to talk together, and we all need to learn how to play in the same pool. So do all the people that own all those systems, and so part of it is getting everybody's job description so that they actually reflect their individual roles in that larger digital strategy, and really taking the time to sit down and say, who are all the players that are going to make this digital strategy a reality, and let's really look at everybody's job. Because what often happens, I can't tell you how many times I've gone into people's offices and they're like, I have a dynamite administrative assistant, they have a anthropology degree and PhD, but they don't know how to use Microsoft Word. So it's just trying to get it so that you actually are hiring for the future vision, and not just in IT and not just in digital, but throughout the entire organization, so all those stakeholders can see their role in that plan.
So, Scott, before you go, we were talking earlier about, there's been over the last 6-9 months, a bunch of folks have gone into newly created positions in museums at that top level, CIO, and you are one of them. I'm interested.
I'm actually the chief digital officer, but yeah.
Chief of digital officer.
Chief digital officer.
Chief digital
CDO.
officer. Sorry.
Which
CDO.
I've been
a new
debating with
flavor
people
as
here,
well.
but as to what the difference is between
That's a
CIO
new
and
flavor.
CDO. But virtual Scott. Yeah.
And so do you? So I'm interested to understand. Was the organization ready for that position and ready for you to come into it? Do you feel like you came in and immediately hit a kind of a vat of molasses, or?
No. The organization that I'm at now, which is the Corning Museum of Glass, was absolutely hungry for somebody to come in and bring all the places together. I mean, I feel incredibly privileged to enter an environment where everybody was ready to hold hands and work together with that kind of a vision. But what I started out by saying about the job descriptions, I think holds true to any environment, is you really have to start there.
And I think the reason for that was, and at the risk of embarrassing Erin, I think Erin was, are we allowed to say Erin she worked with the Corning invested in somebody to help them think through this process.
That's Erin Coburn.
Erin Coburn, yeah, which I think is an incredibly valuable thing for the organization to do, and presumably was massively instrumental in the willingness of the organization to receive you and move ahead.
Yeah, no, I wasn't even looking for the job, but I knew when I saw the opportunity and how Erin had set it up, I thought, well, if there's a place to step in, this is it.
Yeah. But that's an
Thank you,
interesting.
Erin.
Thanks, Erin.
But actually, there is a really interesting point about the kind of pre-work for organizations to do sometimes, that actually isn't about going right the way through that process, with your foot on the gas kind of thing, that there is a preamble that's sometimes needed to get people's heads in the right space and to actually.
The trouble is here we're preaching to the choir, right? I mean, how many museum directors in the room? Crickets. Yeah. So we at some point, this kind of discussion needs to take place at AMD, right? Where we're really bringing these kind of points forward to people who need to drive that kind of change in an organization. Scott, lucky to go to Corning. I think lucky to be in Minneapolis, where leadership there was absolutely hungry, ready. At Corning, they'd been prepped by an expert. At the MIA, they'd gone through several rounds of interviewing, like, God, this is not what we want. What do we want? So I think that's great, right? I bet a lot of you work in organizations who don't have an Aaron coming in to do any kind of evaluation. You have a lot of people who've been on staff for a long time who think they know what they're doing and think it's perfect, and how dare you change it. And it's hard to fight up that hill. And that was thus my early joke about battleships and mountains. I think in my previous experience, it was an organization that clearly wasn't ready for change, even though my job always said I was supposed to be changing things. So it's a little Sisyphean in many ways, right? You just keep rolling the rock, but the hill never seemed to, I guess there was progress. Coven, did we make any progress there? Inches occasionally? I don't know.
One important point I want to make about what Aaron did, though, because Aaron didn't come and say, they need to do, CMOG needs to do these interesting, innovative projects. She came and she looked at structurally.
Yeah, organizational
She looked at the
issues.
people, and she
Yeah.
looked at the organization, and it was completely void of like digital projects, which I
Yeah.
think is a really important place to start, because then it gets you set up to get
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, and it gets you set up to do different kinds of projects, not just that initial set of projects. Right.
Jesse's been waiting.
All right, so I've been frustrated at our organization because we are not getting that top-down kind of view and look at this whole digital strategy.
Sorry,
and
which organization?
ideas. Minnesota Historical Society. So some of us in middle management are kind of taking it on, and in fact, we're meeting for the first time next week to really tackle this issue across departmental team, which I'm hearing is, right on. But how do we keep the momentum going? We're all really busy, we're all kind of head down in our own work, and we are trying to do this really on the side of our own jobs. So how do we keep
It can't be on the side. It's got to be prioritized.
That's why it's so important to focus on creating capacity first, I think.
Yeah.
It really, you've got
Stop
to,
doing some stuff.
Nobody, if you come, you come up to people and say, I want you to do this kind of stuff, and they say, well, my job this is my job, I haven't got time to do that. But, and one of the opportunities of and engaging with people and building trust is if you give them an extra hour a day. If you can figure out how to do that for some people, an extra hour a day, that creates an enormous connection, and that will get somebody on your side. I think thinking that you can layer this on top of something else is a challenge. De-accession some technology.
I would also say that, even bringing together this group, it's also very helpful if there is somebody who is tasked with kind of organizing and setting the agenda and things, even if that role changes so that the responsibility is shared, but having somebody, so it's not just a kind of group organize, it's somebody's like, okay, this is what we're going to focus on this session, or, here are the takeaways that we're going to have, and really think about what are we going to walk out of this discussion with, not just, that get together to, all kind of come to terms that we already knew we shared, so.
And one of the things I found really useful was, it comes back to this, I think this is your job now, and you do need to prioritize this because no one else is going to do it, right? But I think one of the things I found really useful was to badge what I'm doing, right? So actually raising the profile and being an advocate for what I'm doing and making it a thing, right? This is what we're doing now, and this is what I'm focusing on. And talk about it. Talk about what's going on. Share with your colleagues. Talk to your boss. This is where I'm trying to get this group of people together. I'm trying to do this. I'm finding it really difficult. Or this week I've been really successful. I've had a small win. And make it something, because for yourself as well, it's, as I said at the beginning, it's just such a hard role. And you will be having to use skills that perhaps are not on your job description. They absolutely won't be. So you need to do, I think, so my recommendation would be, to make it a thing, but also make sure that you've got some support around what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to go home every night and cry, right?
So from the view of a former psychologist, right?
Yeah.
There's a purpose for catharsis, and there are times to do primal scream therapy.
Yeah.
Your little meeting there is not it, right?
No.
You need to get together and avoid having a bitch session, and
Yeah.
avoid talking about the
It's not about
stupid
that.
Douglas, who's the stupid executive who doesn't understand what's going on. It won't help at all.
No.
Right? You may need to do that on a Friday night with some beer or whatever. Like, let's have a bitch session. Let's get it over with. Now, what are we going to do? Right? So that, and sort of as a team agree, we're not getting together to carp. We're not getting together to badmouth anybody else or judge anyone else. We're just going to make plans. We're going to figure out what we can do, and we're going to do it. We're going to do it positively with energy. We're going to carve out time for it. And that's our purpose.
Yeah.
And that's very, very important. And also from the perspective of organizational management, when secret cadres form to complain about other secret cadres, you just destroy any chance of trust, right? So if they find out about your secret cadre, but the result of it is cool things are happening and they're more productive, like there's not too many senior managers going to get upset about that.
Yeah.
Hi, just a couple of comments. First, a general one. I come to you from the world of higher education, and I'm actually here because I'm really interested in the museum world and interested in doing more work with it.
Welcome.
And it's just striking how the cultural issues are so similar. I have to say, it sounds like on average you're maybe about 10 years behind where higher education, because very much these kind of conversations were going on almost universally 10, 15 years ago. Not so much now, but very reminiscent of when I first moved into the CIO role in higher education. Things were very much in a similar state. But it's striking how the cultural issues of strategic change are the key, the building of trust, the management of ego, and the focus on mission. I would say those are three things I heard that have been very helpful to me. And then I would overlay that having a sense of humor and having a little patience. The last comment I wanted to make was specifically about the issue of how you should handle, for example, the dysfunctional HR department. Never having worked with a functional HR department, I'm not sure what that would be like. But I would just stress that there's the humor, right? You can't fix everything, and sometimes you do have to, as the meme about the internet says, rat around failure. And you can't wait until everything is ready. It's true that you need to build capacity, organizational capacity, to have change. But if you wait until everything's in place, you'll never move forward. So there's always going to be something, whether it's the way purchasing works, the way HR works, a particular office, the people in marketing, the legal counsel, whatever it is, there's going to be something. And I always, my motto for myself and my team is proceed until apprehended. So sometimes you just simply have to get outside of that permission culture and take some risk and give, at least you can be, if you have whoever you manage, whether it's you manage yourself, you manage a team, or you manage a whole division, you have to give yourself or your team permission to take chances and move forward, or you'll never be able to make change in your organization. So I guess the last thing would be have some courage and be bold.
I think on the issue of the HR, how do you approach HR? I think you've got to assume that, and I think this is right, that they know that that this is a problem. And I suspect that their problem is they don't want to let you know that they have a problem. So I would, people are fearful of being exposed, all those kinds of things.
Comes
so
back
I would,
down to trust.
Yeah.
Again,
So
doesn't
I would encourage you to approach the HR department or person and say, I'd love to help you build out, the service that HR can provide in this area. And I have some ideas about, these are the kinds of skill sets that we should be coming in, and just offer that as offer that information without any, qualification, just to engage with them and get them on your side.
There's also an open way to work around somebody, which is to basically go to them and say, this is where we are, this is where you are, this is what I'd like to do. Not necessarily asking for permission, but really just having an open dialogue and saying, I'm going to need to take more control over this because you're not ready. You can't say it exactly that way, but would say I have a need I need to fill right now, and I'm going to suggest that I'm going to take this work off your hands so I can help you by doing this for you. My team can manage the rest. I know that you don't have the capacity right now to read IT job description or something, so I'm going to help you with it, and we're going to work together on it, and then maybe over time I can help you build that capacity in your organization.
You're solving a problem for them. You're going and you're providing a solution.
Right.
And that's a really positive thing.
In a really positive way. They will embrace you.
And they'll be more likely to come and help you with it then.
Completely.
They'll embrace you carefully because it is HR. I don't know about embracing.
Embracing a porcupine.
They'll give you a high five.
Danger,
Something neutral.
And in my defense, that is exactly how I work with HR. I was trying to be provocative before, but absolutely go to them and say, look, I don't expect someone who works in HR who hires security guards and shop clerks to understand the difference between
The nuance of
SQL and MySQL, and it's not their skill set. They
Right.
know it's not their skill set. So how do we help each other? I need their
How
help
do you partner?
organizing
How
and
do you form
posting
the
and tracking
partnership?
things and timing
Yeah.
things and dealing with all the paperwork and the details. And I don't know how many days vacation you get. I don't know what level the position is. That's HR stuff, and they help with that, and they're on top of it.
Right.
And I thank them for it.
Yep.
But when it comes to really looking at people and interviewing them, I just can't, it's not, I need it, my team needs to do that. This is the only way forward.
Well, thank you. Great discussion.
Thank you.
Hi, I came in halfway through the session, so I don't know if this was addressed, but it's sort of relevant to what we were just talking about. But basically, when I walked in, we were talking about kind of computer club or knowledge shares at your organization. And my question is, I work at a small museum, and that has really embraced change. Actually, my position is new as of this February of being in charge of digital initiatives, which was a major structural shift. And it's the end of a 3-year digital engagement project. So the museum has been kind of groomed to start accepting change. But what I have found in my new position, and this is my first time at a museum coming from the corporate world and small business, is
I'm
that...
sorry.
Sorry?
I'm sorry.
Oh.
But welcome.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out, is the sorry from having left or that I was there, because there's lots of... But... so what I've found is that these knowledge shares are great, and we've made a lot of breakthroughs, but the people who come to them are the assistants, the people who aren't decision makers. But my directives come from decision makers, and a lot of them I don't know what it is, whatever it is, they don't admit that there are huge gaps in their knowledge. And they are the ones who a lot of the times need to be coming to the sessions. And I understand that they've got a lot of things riding on their shoulders and their time. But what I have found, and this kind of goes to what people have said about being willing. So I'm willing to, it's not your job, it's not your skill set, I'll be the facilitator. But when you're being directed by someone who really, really has a very small understanding of what you do, the direction becomes a real time suck, because in a small museum, it's just me. And if I'm being directed to do something and they don't really know what they're talking about, we end up at the end of a project with disappointment on one side and frustration on the other. And so I want to know if anyone in this room, or if any of you have experience with, how do you kind of demand just a basic level from even the people in leadership? I'm talking about just, and I don't mean to insult them, and you don't know them, it doesn't matter, but you know, like.
But you could tell us who they are.
No, you know, something is sitting beside someone and asking them to look for something on your own website, and then they go to Google to search for it, you know, or when they email you something that they're interested in, they don't know how to email a link, and they're describing where it was online. And these are people in decision-making positions who aren't going to come to your lunch and learn because they have a lunch with a donor. So I just want to know if anyone has...
Actually, I think it's beyond that. I think it's that kind of clever, stupid people syndrome, where you have very, very expert people, very specialists, very knowledgeable, very experienced. And I think it's very difficult to put yourself into a position of vulnerability where actually you're really clueless. And it's more painful for them possibly to swing around and say, how do you put a link in an email? Without me saying, now click on that and then go to something else. And it's very challenging. And I don't know whether it's peculiar to the museum sector because we are full of expertise and so on. And people have worked very hard to get to that position. But to be equally, you know, like a scale, fantastically kind of smart about some things and incredibly dumb about others, that takes a great deal of subtlety to do that soft learning. How could you offer some soft learning without kind of
they're not
showing people up, basically?
They're not going to come to a group setting.
No, of course they're not.
So that person will not sit in a room with other junior people and make a fool of themselves.
Of course
So
not.
my first suggestion is take it to them. Take it on their grounds, on their time, on their schedule, whatever they need. Take it to them. Give them the private tutorial, right?
Yeah.
The trouble is if they're not asking for the tutorial, how do you offer the tutorial?
Maybe, it might be that it could be added into some other meeting or discussion, or, oh, at the end of this meeting, let's spend 10 minutes and I can show you blah, blah, blah. So it's not like they came
Like a
together for that.
special,
Like a special
remedial
thing.
Yeah, there are
session.
some key words you can use, like alignment is really effective with senior management. So you're sort of like, I'd like to have some time set aside with you to make sure that we're fully aligned on the strategy, right? So
Fully aligned on how to
and
put a
what
link
you
in an
actually are
email.
saying is, I need to teach you something, but I need you to think that you're actually helping me figure something out, right? And then you get in the room and you do that. I also think that, now being a senior manager, I like things in small words and simple charts and diagrams and things. So, SWOT analyses are really effective with senior people. Like, what are they? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Just put it in there and then circle the one we're going to do because it's our strength. And the other one, I'm sure you've all seen this too. You just make that quadrant, and on the bottom, it's things that are easy to do and things that are hard to do. And on the vertical, it's things that are really important and things that really don't matter. And what happens a lot is people get super busy doing the easy things that don't matter. And that's the mud that does nothing. And when you show that to a senior executive, like, look, all these tasks that we've been assigned are not moving the dial anywhere. We're spending all of our time doing that. I want to move over here to things that are really important and not that tough to do. We're going to start there. Then here's some things that are really important and are tougher to do, and that's why we're going to need resources. Lay it out really clearly. Then how can they not support it?
And the way to, deal with that question of how do you decide what's important is make it, what's the value to the visitor? Or, what's the value to the end user? Not, what is our value too? Because I think then you're also getting it out of our perceived importance for me in my particular area or department.
What if you created a weekly or bi-weekly email where you tech tips or something that just went out to the organization? I know it's small, but it would be a safe environment for those individuals to consume learning something. So,
Sure,
you weren't, just short. How do you embed a link in an email? Just creating a safe learning. You need to teach those people. You need to create a safe learning environment for them. So
And make it
how
a
do you do
video
that?
and tell them it's your new style of making videos. You need them to check out the video and see if the sound is balanced.
Shifty.
Okay, I just also wanted to maybe give you some practical answers. I work for Tate as a digital production lead, and we've gone through 2 restructures and digital transformation projects and so on and on. We are just on the way to our 3rd one, and maybe hopefully last, probably not. But I think also from a practical perspective, I think it is about having these meetings with your senior managers. And when they say and start talking about information architecture of your website and links, to that sort of minute detail, which isn't their job. It's your job to show them why they've got you in the job. And to show sort of, this is what you do, here is the roadmap, this is where we are, I understand these are the objectives, is that what you understand? So kind of putting everyone in their place and having that conversation and building the trust in them, understanding that they got you to think about that. They don't actually need to think about it. And I think that's what you need to do on a regular basis, and then it covers everything that the panel have already said in terms of the practical things you can do. But kind of show them that you are the person who they've employed, who they pay to do this job. It's not them. They need to lead on a strategic level, and then you can sort other things out.
Nice point.
Yeah.
So to sum up so far, I see 2 levels.
I'm glad someone is.
No, I see, seriously, I see 2 levels. One is a higher level strategic series of actions that we can take. And the other is, I don't want to say lower, but more one-to-one personal interactions that we can take. Now, Trish said something that was very interesting to me, and I'm sorry if I'm paraphrasing incorrectly, but basically it's like, they don't understand, what I'm saying, or they, and I'm going to turn that around. And Allegra mentioned practical things that have happened, and this just happened to me yesterday when I got to the conference. I manage our blog at the American Art Museum, Smithsonian American Art Museum. And we put up a blog post, and the first sentence says, "How does a curator unpack a painting, you may ask?" Well, I got an email from somebody in the registrar's office who said, please, no, we have enough trouble. I'm paraphrasing her as well. We have enough, please, 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 curators don't do that. I realized that it was part of the way, et cetera. And what I did is, it surprised me that it came so easy. I wrote her and I said, you're absolutely right. Next time we'll do a better job. And I got a big thank you for that. We don't often understand how important certain things are in the other offices. A huge lesson is our conservators, do not say restoration at all. I'm not kidding. It means something. It means something different. And so it behooves us to understand the languages that our coworkers are speaking. So I sort of liken this to the difference between Western power struggles and Eastern power struggles. So boxing, it's power against power. And in Eastern martial arts and stuff, you take the other person's power and you use it. And so this I will call it a low level, I'm really sorry, I felt really great, and she reinforced that by a huge, huge thank you, and that's all I want to say.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, mistakes will happen. Own it. Talk about what you learned from it. Move on. When you know someone made a mistake and they don't apologize, do you ever trust that person again?
But I think that that point's really relevant, and I think it's broader in that there's often a lot of misunderstanding in the museum world. So technologists have their own language, and curators have their own language, and each of us want to speak in that language to show how much we know about our particular topic. I had a revelatory moment years ago when this kind of uphill struggle of Sisyphus, against, particularly in an art museum, and curators, and who would constantly push against what I was trying to do. And I had this moment where I realized their whole background and training and philosophy is about critique. And that's just what they do. That's their DNA. And when you understand that, everything, I just had this much easier time going forward, because it stopped me taking things personally, and it helped me understand that whatever I put in front of these people, their reaction is to critique it. So I'm just going to let them do that, and I'm going to encourage them to do that, and I'm going to support them in doing that, because that's how I'm going to get them on my side. And once they've gone through that process, then you can start, you're kind of over that hump, and you can start having a much more productive relationship. So I think it was it Jason from the Minnesota Historical Society?
Jason.
I said, I would be ready to be pushed back, but understand that it's just people kind of doing their job and just, just being who they are, and kind of accept that and let them do it, and then, get it out of the way and then move on.
One of the most effective training sessions I had for the staff in my current museum is I brought in an improv troupe and had them teach all of my technology guys and gals the yes and exercise. You guys familiar with that exercise? So in improv, especially if you're having some fun with it, you're actually trying to throw the other guys off on stage, so you keep throwing more into the conversation. And what the other person has to do is agree and then move on, right? So it's fun, it's funny. You can play with it a little bit with some techno jargon and do other kinds of things. But you get into that mindset where instead of sort of disagreeing with people right away and defending your territory, instead you're agreeing with them and then steering the conversation back to where it needed to be. And people respond really well to this. It's not secret or manipulation. You're not trying to be sneaky. It's just a matter of the style with which you communicate. And I think, Nick, in many ways, you're talking about communication, the value and the importance of communication up and down the hierarchy of the museum, across, between colleagues, from technology out, from out back into technology. I mean, there's so many potential channels and so many opportunities for it to break, right? So if you put that effort in to understand that you don't say, Dale, when you're restoring things, right, because now I've just ticked you off, and also not reply when you have no idea what I'm talking about when I say that the WAPs are malfunctioning. I think there might be a corruption in the ARM table. And you just look at me like, what the, right? I'll never say that to you, I promise, right?
Also the, you know, the yes and. Now I've read, I've only read, you know, theoretically in, say, marriage counseling, that the yes but negates everything that you said.
Never say but.
Never say but, yeah. I've only read that.
And now we're going to put it into practice. So yes, and we've now run out of time. So thank you all very much. There is a related panel, perhaps, on Friday, if you're interested, at 3 o'clock. Carolyn and Charlotte and myself will be on that. It's about digital leads who have left the museum and not gone on to another museum. So if you're interested, I'm going to put in a plug for that.
Absolutely.
These two gentlemen are gamelessly employed
The subtitle
by
is
museums.
Get Out While You Can.
So putting in a plug for that. And thank you all for coming, and thank you all for participating
Thank you very
in the
much. You've been
conversation.
brilliant.
Thanks.